Okay, layer 6. Layer 6 of 13. My voice is beginning to go. That's fine. Restarting the game. Yes, one card, Khan Liberated, restarts the game. A game that has restarted immediately ends. Nobody wins, loses, or draws. All players in that game, when it ended, then start a new game following the procedures set forth in the Rule 103 starting the game with the following exception. And it goes on into a whole bunch of different things. I will come on to there is a little bit of controversy around what that actually means. There is a lower layer about restarting the game, but generally speaking, this is what it means. Cards are drawn one at a time. So I did mention this earlier. For replacement effects, when you draw a card, they're drawn one at a time. So if somebody says draw 3 cards, that's actually draw 1, draw 1, draw 1. And obviously, like I say, it matters for replacement effects. So I'm not going to cover that much more. Special actions. Yay, special actions. Special actions are interesting. There are 10 of them, and they don't use the stack. So that's why they're called special actions. So the 10 things are playing a land, doesn't use the stack, turning a face down creature face up, taking an action at a later time, usually to end a continuous effect. So that's when there are certain abilities that you can have which are like pay 2 to end this effect, for example. Taking your pants off is a special action. The speed of taking your pants off is going to be addressed later, I think. Taking action to ignore an effect from an ability for a duration. So that is like laying an arbiter, for example. Circling vultures, discard ability. It is literally the only named special actions. Yeah, it says you may discard this at any time. You may discard an instant, I think, something like that, and that's a special action. Suspending a card is a special action. Paying 3 to put your companion from outside the game into your hand. Foretelling a card is a special action. Rolling the planar die is a special action, and turning a conspiracy card face up as well. So yeah, all of those special actions. Somebody's asking if they reset priority, and Siberianrabbit says yes, they do. So yes. Cool. So yeah, special action. They're basically a set of things that they don't use the stack, and you can do them through split second. I think that's the fun. That's the one that most people remember, is things like unmorphing a willbender to get around split second, because unmorphing is a special action. Triple face cards. So if you manifest a double face card, that card is face down, but it isn't one of the faces of the double faced cards. So if an effect allows a player to cast a double face card as a face down creature spell, or if a double face card enters the battlefield face down, it'll have the characteristic given to it by the rule effect that caused it to be face down. So that'll be manifested in that case, or morphed. So yeah, you can have a double face card that is face down, and it's super face down, but you basically have to cover it up using a substitute card or opaque sleeves. So yeah, that is the triple face. Subgames. Everyone loves subgames. I love subgames. I made a lovely video about this on I'm going to say April Fool's 2021 about Charizard. Charizard allows players to play a Magic subgame. There are more there's silver bordered cards that allow you to do this, but Charizard is the only black bordered one. Banned in probably everything that everyone cares about. It's a completely separate Magic subgame created by an effect. It's a game within a game, and the main game is the one in which the spell ability that created the subgame was cast or activated. The main game just stops a bit, and then the subgame happens, and then when the subgame stops, we go back to the main game. So yeah, subgames is one of those ones where they looked at how long it was going to take to actually do rounds of things. It's just like, nope, do not want to deal with this, and that is sensible, because Charizard is just. I understand the design behind it is just, this is nonsense. Let's not do that. Prismatic Piper. So kind of a unique one here. It's got a characteristic defining ability that has you make a decision before the game starts for the purposes of color identity. So, you have to say what color it is, to make sure your deck is legal. But it's also interesting because it is the only non-basic land card that is automatically in your draft pool when you're drafting Commander Legends. So when you're drafting Commander Legends, you always have access to the Prismatic Piper. And that's just a thing. And it is kind of weird that is a thing, but it kind of makes sense, I guess, for Commander Legends. If you somehow manage, while drafting Commander Legends, to not draft a legendary creature, then this is your out. And sorry, Siberian Rabbit says there are 2. You get 2 of them in your draft pool. So wonderful. If you want to partner them together, you can do wonderful things like that. Daybound and Moonmist. So yes, one of the fun things that people were always trying to do and wondering about during the new Innistrad block, Trinisphere. Daybound. Daybound is found on the front faces of some transforming double face cards and has 3 static abilities. It means if it's night, the opponent enters transformed. As it becomes night, if it's front face up, you transform it. And this opponent cannot be transformed except by its Daybound ability. So Moonmist. Moonmist would normally transform all humans, but you cannot transform a card with Daybound with Moonmist. And that is a decision that they made. So yeah, it is just a thing that happens. I did try for a very long time to break this card for shorts, and didn't quite break it. I still have ideas in the back of my head, but yeah, it's there are some fun ones. If you remove ability from a card with Daybound, you can then use Moonmist. Yes, I think you can. Yes, if you remove the abilities, you can transform it. I think Magic Online doesn't like it. I think that there are reasons why I haven't made content around this, and I'm pretty sure it's because Magic Online is just like. So yeah. All right, next one up. Spellskite can target anything. So nowhere on Spellskite does it say you have to target a spell that has a target. So it just says change a target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. So one of the cheesy strategies you used to be able to do with apparently Blue Tron back in the day was to use Mindslaver on an opponent playing Spellskite and then have them play a spell and then activate Spellskite on it for Phyrexian mana until they were dead by paying 2 life, or if they're on an odd life total, until they had 1. So yeah, fun times. You can basically just if you have a Spellskite out, you can make them go to 1 or 0 life. Intervening if clauses. Oh, one of the fun ones that people always find. Yeah, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle is kind of the big one here that most people will have heard of in the past. So yeah, and a triggered ability may read when, whenever, or at something if, effect. So when a trigger ability occurs, the ability checks whether the stated condition is true, and then it triggers only if it is true. Otherwise it does nothing. And then when it triggers, it checks it again as it resolves, and if it isn't true at that time, it's removed from the stack and does nothing. So it mirrors the check for legal targets, and that's referred to as the intervening if clause. So Valakut the Molten Pinnacle is kind of like the big one here. I think you had Scapeshift 7 lands. You had one Valakut and 6 mountains. They all enter the battlefield at the same time. They all see each other enter the battlefield, and they all trigger at the same time. And you have 5 of the mountains at that point, and then Valakut triggers for each of them. So if you want to minimize the damage that you do, if you destroy a mountain in response to those 6 triggers, you will only take 3 damage. Well, you'll only have Valakut dealing 3 damage. Basically, because each of them are triggering, 5 of those will see there's only 4 other mountains, and so the intervening if clause fizzles off. But the one there'll be one that does see 5 other mountains come in. The original ability of the one that you destroy, the mountain you destroy, will see the 5 other mountains enter the battlefield. So you'll get 1 instance rather than 6. So yeah, you you get less damage. So yeah, intervening if clauses are kind of a real interesting one. You've got to keep an eye out for them. There is going to be an interesting one with Phage coming up in a short while, which I'll carry on explaining then. Ante is orange, so nobody plays for Ante anymore, or they shouldn't because it's bad. If players agree to play for Ante, at the beginning of the game, before you draw your starting hands, you put a random card from your library into the Ante zone. The winner of the game receives permanent ownership of all the cards in that zone. Several cards interact with the Ante mechanic, and all of those cards have the added text, remove this card from your deck before playing if you're not playing for Ante. Yeah, gambling, good old Magic the Gambling. Yeah, good name, Holly. Yeah, I guess this kind of made sense at the time, but I think there's a reason the Ante did not last long. I believe it didn't last into many sets, certainly. But yeah, it was a bad idea because, you know, when you start getting into tournament settings and people are betting cards on things, it kind of does look a little bit like gambling. Probably not a good thing. Anyway. Goyf versus Bolt. So, state-based actions. Again, we've covered state-based actions recently. This is kind of a post chart for Goyf and looking at damage and when state-based actions are actually going to trigger. So, your opponent has a land in the graveyard. You have a sorcery in yours, and this makes Goyf a 2/3. So you have a lightning bolt in hand. I'm going to say, I want to get rid of your Goyf. At the beginning of your opponent's end step, I'm going to cast Lightning Bolt, targeting the Goyf. So there's 3 damage on the Goyf when the Lightning Bolt resolves. So you think, all right, okay, it's 3 damage, it's going to die. However, when your state-based actions are checked, Lightning Bolt is in the graveyard. And because the characteristic defining ability of Goyf is saying, oh yeah, it's equal to the number of different types of things in your graveyards, it's actually a 3/4. And when you look to see state-based actions, it goes, there's a 3/4 with 3 damage marked on it. Okay, cheers, bye. And that's it. You've wasted your bolt. And that's an interaction that, if you're not careful, it's one of those ones which you will get bitten by. But thankfully, Goyf isn't particular. I don't think Goyf's as popular as it used to be. You know, I think Modern has got a lot more broken. Bolts don't kill creatures, state-based actions kill creatures. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly right. Love it. All right, fun one. Yeah, Trinisphere. Good old Trinisphere in Modern. Always applies last. So Trinisphere's ability affects the total cost of a spell. So it's applied after any other cost increases or cost reduces. So the first thing you do is you apply any cost increases to a spell, and then you apply cost reduces, and then you look at the amount of mana you have to pay. And if it's less than 3 mana in total, you'll pay 3 in total. If it forces you to pay at least 3 for cost reduction, alternative cost, and Phyrexian mana. But it doesn't force you to pay when you're using Convoke, Improvise, Delve, or Crick, as those are alternative mana payments. So that's not changing the cost at that point. That's paying the mana in a different way. So, fun banding. So creatures with banding. Any creature with banding and up to 1 without can attack in a band. Bands are blocked as a group, and if creatures with banding, any creatures with banding you control are blocking or being blocked by a creature, you, the attacker, get to divide that creature's combat damage, not its controller, amongst any of the creatures being blocked by or is blocking. So it's basically a different way of making combat maths work. Thankfully, because it got to the point where it was just way too confusing to understand how banding works. It became a meme, essentially, of like, banding is really hard. How does banding work? And so, yeah, in the end, the banding's gone away. Nobody cares about banding. If you play cards with banding, banding is bad. So, yeah. it shouldn't come up. But if it does, this is the explanation. Essentially, you get the choices of things rather than the opponent, rather than the defending player. Layer 8 is an unofficial term for the continuous effects that still follow timestamp rules, but they don't get included in other layers rules because they don't affect objects. So True Believer's one, that says you have Shroud. Spellbook says you have no maximum hand size. So yeah, that's the layer 8. If anyone ever mentions those, so they do exist. It's just because they don't there's no interaction with those continuous effects. That's fine. All right, out of order sequencing. Out of order sequencing is when during a tournament you take orders in an order that's improper, technically improper, but the final result is fine. So actually, we kind of just let it slide. So the most common one that you see is when you play a spell and you put it in the graveyard before you then resolve its effects. So as long as everything works out in the end and you're not changing the outcome, it's fine to sequence things in a slightly different way. That's as much as I wanted to say on that. Yeah, just out of order sequencing is more of a tournament thing than a Magic rules thing. It's not actually mentioned in the comprehensive rules. Zur, bypassing hexproof. So this is, if you've not played Zur or you've never put an aura onto the battlefield without having cast it, you might not notice it. You might not know this, but so auras only target when they're cast. So if you put them into play through another way, forcing them to find a proper object, they force themselves to find a proper object to attach themselves to in a process that doesn't target. Zur basically does this for enchantments with converted mana cost less than 3 or less. So you can put them onto hexproof creatures, you can put them onto shroud creatures, you can put them onto players with hexproof or shroud. It's complete nuts. Protection is one of those ones where you can put them onto, I think you can put them onto a permanent with protection, but then they'll fall off when state-based actions are checked. So that's one thing you can't do. But yeah, in terms of like hexproof and shroud, just gets around them. I can't imagine, given the amount of time they've spent on like other rules, I would imagine that that's one that's gonna go away at some point in the future. But for now, yeah, putting an aura onto the battlefield by any other method that's not casting doesn't target. So that's fun. Oh yes, Drop of Honey. Oh good. Banisher Priest. If Banisher Priest is the only creature on the field with an active Drop of Honey. So Drop of Honey says, at the beginning of your upkeep, destroy the creature with the least power. It can't be regenerated. And if if 2 or more creatures are tied for the least power, you choose one of them. So when there are no creatures on the battlefield, sacrifice Drop of Honey. That's the important bit. So when there are no creatures on the battlefield, sacrifice Drop of Honey. So if Banisher Priest is the only creature on the battlefield with an active Drop of Honey, the Banisher Priest dying will cause the Drop of Honey to destroy itself. Even if the Banisher Priest has exiled something, and there is a creature... So even when state-based actions are going for, oh look, there is a Banisher Priest on the battlefield, somebody gets priority. Oh look, there's another creature on the battlefield that was under the Banisher Priest. That's fine for state-based action. It's like, okay, no, not a problem. But for Drop of Honey, we'll notice that point in the middle of that where the Banisher Priest has died and there is no other creature on the battlefield, and that's enough to make that trigger. That's just one of those weird ones. I think one of the wordings for the old cards is one of these ones which intuitively is like, what? Okay, makes no sense to me. But because it's not, I think the general class of these will come onto later. But it is one of the nuttier things. Is you think, oh, state-based action, they're like, that there are defined points in time at which I can check whether things happen, right? And then there are these other triggers where it's just like, in the middle of an ability resolving, this thing can trigger. It's just like, yeah, okay, what? But yeah, we'll come on to those later. Planeswalkers versus Doubling Season. It seems weird to have this one so low. I think this is one that people tend to see quite a lot. You know, it just seems like it's fairly straightforward. But Doubling Season. Doubling Season only doubles counters from effects and not from costs. So a Planeswalker entering the battlefield will have its counters doubled. So if it enters the battlefield with 4, would enter with 4 on, Doubling Season will double that to 8. But activating a loyalty ability is a cost and not an effect. So when you put the counters on for the cost, it will not double the number of counters on the Planeswalker, or rather not double the number of counters you put on for the loyalty ability. So it's one of those ones where people, you know, look at Doubling Season and go, oh my god, that's so broken. And it is broken, but it's only broken at the point at which you play it, not at the point at which you start putting extra counters on. But like I said, I think people will have seen this one before. So, fun one. Banishing Light versus Commanders. This doesn't work anymore since M21. But before then, Commanders going to the... If a commander died or a commander was exiled, putting it in the command zone was a replacement effect. So, if you use Banishing Light on a commander, you had the effect become, when it enters the battlefield, put target non-land permanent and opponent controls in the command zone until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. And because it wasn't referring to the object in exile, it wasn't referring to the object in exile, and since it's in a public zone, it's still in a public zone, the Banishing Light was able to keep track of where the commander had gone. And if it left the battlefield without the commander being cast out of the command zone, you can return it from the command zone back to the battlefield. Now, they've changed that. Now they've actually got a state-based action just for commanders, which does change things slightly because the state-based action will put it into the, if you exile it as part of the Banishing Light, there's essentially it changes zones at that point. It doesn't work anymore, but that's since M21. But it's a fun one, yeah. Right, next up is Goblin, Rabblemaster, and Changing Phases. So there's an exception. It's basically an exception in another common shortcut. So normally if you're saying go to combat and somebody wants to play an instant at that point, you assume that person is acting at the beginning of combat. And that's fair. That's just something you assume. However, if you have a trigger that says, or if you have a trigger that's going to affect whether a beginning of combat ability is going to trigger, then you need to do that in the main phase. So if somebody says in response to go to combat, you lightning bolt Rabblemaster, the assumption at that point is that the active player is actually still in the main phase to not hit the beginning of combat trigger. And so at that point, the active player can still do things that they would normally do in their main phase, like play more creatures or play sorceries. So it's just a bit of a weird one. I think it's more likely to be hit in Paper Magic than Arena, for example. But yeah, just another common shortcut that's slightly weird. This is a fun one. I honestly didn't know this one until I looked it up. So if you have the spell Hallow, prevent all damage target spell would deal this turn. You gain life equal to the damage prevented this way. Prevention effects that apply to damage from a permanent spell on the stack continue to apply to damage from the permanent that spell becomes. So, if you cast Hallow targeting a creature on the stack, that creature enters the battlefield and has an enter the battlefield ability that deals damage to something. That damage is prevented, which is bizarre, absolutely bizarre. I love it. Bizarre. If it attacked, if it's got haste, for example, that damage is prevented, and you gain the life equal to that way. It's just mind bending. I love it, but I kind of feel sad about doing this now because I would love to make a video about this. this feels great. It feels like this needs to be a short. But no, there you go. I've spoiled it now. You get to see this one. Hallow targeting a creature spell. There's that weirdness.